Hey, I'm Stan Deaton with the Georgia Historical Society. Welcome back. I heard a lot of great things about the video last week on the Black Death and a lot of questions about the flu pandemic of 1918, and that's what I want to talk with you about today. As I did last week, I remembered a book that I bought many years ago, and this time I've actually read it once before, but had no recollection of ever having read it. One of the great joys of aging is you get to read things again without any memory of having read them once before. This is a book by Gina Colada, who is a science reporter. It sounds like pina colada, but it's not. A science reporter for the New York Times. This book is called Flu, the story of the great influenza pandemic of 1918 and the search for the virus that caused it. And it's not so much about the flu pandemic as it is about trying to discover it again, to recreate it, and in order to understand why it was so deadly. There had been flu episodes before in history. There have been some since. There's never been anything like it. It was worse than the Black Death. It started in the spring of 1918, and the first wave wasn't that bad. People got it, mild symptoms, and they recovered. But it came back with a vengeance in September of 1918, just as World War I was winding down. But there were groups of soldiers in barracks and on army bases and in forts all around the world, particularly in the United States, which was mobilizing in a big way to get involved in World War I. And so when this thing hit, it hit like a hurricane. And it absolutely, the second time around, was extremely contagious and extremely deadly. Now, it started at a fort in Kansas in March of 1918, and it spread rapidly all over the world, almost instantaneously, which is one of the reasons that scientists have had a hard time figuring this thing out, because it seemed to pop up everywhere. They weren't even sure how it was transmitted. They didn't know that it was a virus. So, world population in 1918 is about 1.8 billion, and scientists estimate that about one-third of the world's population, about 600 million people, got the flu at some point during this period, and an estimated 50 to 100 million died. That's a lot of people, about 6% of the entire world's population wiped out. In the United States, about 675,000 deaths. And if you think of it, the flu usually was U-shaped in its data. It struck the very young and the very old, and the healthy people in the middle, the adults in the middle, were not as affected. The thing about the 1918 flu that made it so different is that it looked like a W. It did attack the very young, younger than 5, and those older than 65, but in equal numbers, it attacked people between the ages of 20 and 44. That was one of the things that made it so puzzling. It just seemed to go after the population that traditionally hadn't been hit as much by the flu. Now, there was no World Health Organization then. There was no CDC. There was no flu vaccine. There was no test for the flu. There were no mechanical ventilators. There was no penicillin. There were no antibiotics for secondary infections. And so science was almost crippled. Also, 30% of American medical personnel were in the military because of World War I. So factories were closed. People were quarantined. Theaters were shut down. Churches, schools, businesses of all kinds. Much like what we're going through right now with the coronavirus, the same thing happened then. On top of a war that had lasted for 4 years and that had killed 37 million people, killed or wounded. This virus, much more than that. So the psychological effect was absolutely devastating. The life expectancy in the United States dropped 12 years because of the great flu pandemic of 1918. Now, one of the questions we have now is, can this thing come back? It's a virus, it's an H1N1. And vaccines do exist for the H1N1, so scientists think now that because of vaccines, because of antibiotics, which were discovered in 1928, that can be used for secondary infections like pneumonia, because of mechanical ventilators and intensive care units and a more worldwide response, that we would be better equipped to meet this kind of disaster again. But let's hope we never have to find out what it would be like to go through another pandemic like the flu pandemic of 1918. Stay safe and stay strong as we go through this one. I'm Stan Deaton with the Georgia Historical Society. Thanks for watching.